Our meeting today, where we're joined by myself, Holly Stapleton, Dan Pedersen, Vicka Bell, and Nusha. Nusha, might you want to give an introduction to the series and what you guys are trying to do here at the BSA Akai group?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our session today. This is one of the many sessions that we planned for this year, and it's looking at planning for 2022 and beyond that, looking back at the year past and the challenges we went through, and then how we can plan for the years ahead. Our panelists are ready here to present themselves, and I will be the host in the background to record the questions that you might have, and Nick will be moderating the session.
Thank you much, Nusha. I think we can go around and do some introductions. My name is Nick Brooks. I am the head of higher education and historic preservation at Dream Collaborative. Holly, how about you next, maybe?
Sure. Thanks, Nick. My name's Holly Stapleton, and I'm the Senior Director of Business Operations and Chief of Staff at ACUI. So we are the professional home for housing and residence life professionals around the globe. My work really focuses on education, research, publications, and advocacy for the association. And I was the lead of the COVID-19 efforts that we kind of have been engaged in for the last year now. In my role, I work really closely with members like Dan and Vicka and other professionals that are helping to keep our students safe and on campus. Nice to meet y'all.
Dan, I have you up next.
Great. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you virtually. I'm Dan Pedersen. I serve as the Director of Housing and Residential Services at Northern Illinois University. We're positioned in DeKalb, Illinois, which is about 70 miles outside of Chicago. 20 plus year professional and student affairs and adjunct faculty member. And I currently serve as the chairperson for the Public Policy Advisory Committee for ACUI.
Vicka, you're up.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vicka Bell Robinson. I'm currently the Director of Residence Life at Miami University. I use pronouns she, her, hers. I've been at Miami for about 14 years. I mean, this is my 4th year as director, and like Dan, I'm about a 20 plus year professional in the in housing and residence life. And I'm a chair-elect for the ACUI Public Policy Advisory Committee. I've also served on the Future of Housing Task Force, and then I'm connected with our regional association and meet regularly with the other public institutions in the state of Ohio. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for the introductions. And just for everyone in the crowd, we are here today to talk about the work that this group has done in support of the campus experience. Vicka, would you take a few moments to describe some of the actions that you've taken to preserve the integrity of the campus experience and what it's been like for students?
Yeah, I think that what we've really tried to do is there's so much of the campus experience is really about being there. And so when the pandemic hit last year, we lost a major function, a major feature of what it is about college, about not just at Miami, but just generally about college. And of course, we work in housing and residence life. So not having your students on site it's a game changer. But what we've always tried to do is remember sort of what's the goal, right? So the goal of college at the very end is to have students retained from their first to second year and then persist all of the way through graduation. And how do we do that? So really trying to keep that as our core, keep that as our focus. What does student success look like? How do we help students be successful in that? How do we help them? I mean, we're all experiencing this. We're all experiencing this pandemic, and they're trying to accomplish sort of this major life goal of being on campus. So keeping students at the center of everything that we do, and trying to, I once worked for a director who was teaching his daughter drums, and he was like, I don't really know how to play the drums, but all I have to do is be one lesson ahead of her. So if I can just stay one lesson ahead of her, then I can teach her. And I think that's been sort of the story of higher education during the pandemic. If we can just get a little bit ahead, and then we can help students be successful. And I think we've tried to do that throughout the last year.
So I think, thank you. That's been extremely helpful. And Dan, I think you had some similar observations, and could you share with us a little bit about your work as you're trying to also preserve the campus experience?
Sure. Just to piggyback on some of Vicka's thoughts, in our work in collegiate housing, I think one of the challenges for us was to maintain this sense of transition for students and community building and engagement and feeling a connection to the campus, while at the same time trying to provide an environment that was focused on personal and community safety as it, within the guardrails of the pandemic. And in our work, I think what we found was that we had to forge very important collaborative relationships with folks that were never really on our agendas, like county health departments, all of our local health professionals, everybody that we could manage to pull in that would create a safe environment for students to succeed now became part of our daily routines, where we were managing things related to keeping the pack safe, working with individuals that, became infected or were exposed to the virus, and trying to keep them on a pathway towards completing a semester or an academic year, or in some cases, graduation. And you throw in, that sounds really great at a 30,000 foot level, but try to then piece in some of the important elements of the individual who is trying to, achieve their own personal aspirational things, like be a collegiate athlete, a music education major who needs to be in a rehearsal space and play an instrument alongside other people for accompaniment in order to really get the full experience. A theater student, so people who have to do clinicals for nursing. All of these things became very, very complicated pathways in terms of keeping things preserved so that folks could complete a collegiate year experience under the same kind of pretense that we would have been providing them a year earlier. So to say that that's exhausting is an understatement. So there were, I'm not going to take the presentation time to go through this, but there were a lot of champions that stepped up to do different roles on all of our campuses this year that were not anywhere close to what they were hired to do when they came to work at their institutions, but they were the heroes that were needed for the pandemic that was in front of us. And every campus has got dozens, if not hundreds of stories of people who just did what needed to be done to keep our students on that pathway.
Oh, thanks for that. It's definitely very helpful. And I think both you and Vicka have maybe slightly different, let's say, student populations. And I think we might be a little bit remiss. Let's just give some people some background and tell them, who are your students right now, and what does your cohort look like?
Sure. I'll just preface this by saying Vicka and our campuses belong to the same collegiate athletic conference, a Mid-American conference. So we have a lot of similarities. But then when you start looking at the demographics of our student body, it does start to diverge a little bit. We're a comprehensive regional institution that focuses on research, performance, and a lot of other areas. But we also aspire to be an accessible and affordable campus to the Chicagoland area. So we do bring in a very different mix of student population, given our position outside of kind of on the western rim of the Chicago suburbs. So there are a lot of our students that come in as first year students that have some challenges financially, academic preparedness. And if you throw in the mix that almost all of our freshmen spent the last quarter of their high school experience learning from home in an environment where those instructors weren't prepared to do that either, right? So they finish out their high school career trying to learn at home in an environment where the districts weren't prepared to shift that way. They did the best that they could, but it really wasn't ideal. And then our faculty then had to start a fall semester under the same guidelines with very little preparation and experience doing that kind of modality. It created a real challenge in terms of retention for some of our students, particularly that were already facing some other uphill battles that we knew about. That's perennially populations that we have a lot of front-facing academic support services available to them that had to be done virtually this year. So it made it even more challenging for that group.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then just as far as Miami, so we're located in Oxford, Ohio. We get we sometimes, because the Miami leads the university. People think that we're a private school, but we're a public school in the state of Ohio. But we are about 40% out-of-state students. So unlike NIU, we're less regional than NIU, and we about 40% out of state. We have representation from all over the country, and that was particularly challenging when the university suddenly closed last year. So you think about, I was thinking about sort of the challenges associated with the closure, and you think student items. I mean, wow, like people bring a lot of stuff to school and you don't really know how much stuff they bring to school until it all has to leave very quickly, or until they've left it and you're trying to figure out how to get it back. But we are, our average ACT, SAT scores come in above 26. So we have a pretty wealthy and a pretty educated or privileged group of students that join us here in Oxford every year. They come with expectations of what their college experience is going to look like, and so do their parents. And so when the pandemic was first, unfolding, just like you see in society at large, folks who were like, we're overplaying this. Why aren't you staying open? I can't believe you're sending my student home. We closed campus, but we had students who just got apartments off campus. And so then we still have a student population that's here, but then a faculty and a staff population that is now being quarantined at home or under our stay-at-home orders. Lots of dynamic between the state of Ohio and the universities, the public universities, and differences between the publics and privates. So yeah, but just to give you a sense, we're normally probably right around 20,000 students. We have 8,000 students that live on campus, and then the rest live generally really closely in the Oxford area. Oxford's a pretty rural place. It's about 45 minutes north of Cincinnati, about an hour south of Dayton, just to give you a sense of where we're located.
Well, thanks. That's very helpful. And I think that this is a really nice segue into the work that you did with Holly in order to try and support each other, which I think is one of the reasons for the call and one of the reasons for Occupy in the first place, is to try and make sure that there are resources available to institutions and individuals in order to try and create just this common network of collaboration and support. I think, Holly, I'd like to let you just speak a little bit about the group that you convened and some of the work that you did together in order to try and let everyone know that they weren't in this alone.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been kind of the mission, right, of the last year, and Vicka and Dan can speak to that probably better than I can. When this first started kind of percolating at the end of February and early March, one thing became very clear very quickly, and that was that we were going to have to address this in ways that we've never addressed an issue before on a campus. In the beginning, a lot of people were talking about, oh, it's like H1N1, and then we quickly realized, well, no, it really isn't, and so the beginning was about understanding the virus, how it's transmitted, what were the risks, et cetera, et cetera. The association did some programming with some other partners in our space. So for example, ACHA, the College Health Association, to help us understand how it's transmitted, et cetera. And then we really got into what is this going to actually mean on campus? And what are our members going to need to know in order to open or continue to offer services in a safe way? And our position always was, we can't make a decision for campuses. They need to make those decisions. Our advice was it has to be safe, right? And so our president at the time, Vaughn Stange, who's at the University of Iowa, said, let's convene a task force or a work group and make sure that it's represented across the United States. We also talk to folks outside of the United States and really dig into those functional areas that make housing and residence life possible. Fundamentally, we knew that this is what the work that needed to happen. And we needed a group that was going to be very ambitious and willing to really kind of spend that time while they were also dealing with what was going on their own campus. So talk about heroes. Vicka and Dan were part of that. That was very important and a heavy lift piece of work. We looked at this in a few different ways. There were several areas we thought were important. And we basically assigned folks in different subgroups to kind of attend to those things. So what does capacity and assignments look like? What does staffing and HR look like? How do we build community in the virtual space or in a space where social distancing was required? How does this impact operations? What do we need to be thinking about with respect to equity and inclusion? How do we engage in student discipline in an educational fashion as opposed to a legalistic or punitary fashion. And then what are those mitigation strategies that all of us should be thinking about? So we assembled this group. We had a core group, and as I said, Vicka and Dan were part of that. And then each of those core groups expanded to more members to really dig into those ideas. I think at the end of the day, we probably engaged around 60 people total. Lots of interest across the association for sure. And we gave them prompts of things that we needed to give people because this was still pretty early on. So, what are the main challenges that people need to be thinking about with respect to that area? What are the areas of concern? What are the promising practices we've heard other people using or implementing? Because at that point, nothing had been proven, right? Or nothing had been vetted. And what are the considerations that we all need to be thinking about moving forward so that we stay on that path of being one step ahead, as Vicka said? The most primary piece of information that this group released was a recommendations document. And we call it that on purpose because they are recommendations. They're not set in stone. They're things that we came to along with partners. We involved the College Health Association in this as well as the Risk Management Association, people who had kind of a different lens that we wanted to have kind of integrated into all of this. We also had them develop other resources like draft quarantine and isolation policies and plans so that people could have some direction as they set those. How to collaborate across campus more effectively, and I think Vicka led that piece. Recommendations for student discipline, and then some checklists. So if you're in under-resourced schools, what are the main things that you have to do right now to be one step ahead, or at least to be on track? So all these things happened. We also polled our members quite a bit through straw polls, and that group helped us really develop those items so that we could make sure we were targeting, those heightened items and those pieces we needed to know about. And we had a ton of webinars. Over the course of 2020, we had over 100 webinars, which is pretty significant. And we continue to do that. And we do that pretty regularly because, at the end of the day, the engagement amongst the professionals themselves was what needed to happen to get us to where we needed to be.
We should have sold those to Netflix. Now that I'm thinking about it.
We totally should have.
Yeah.
Revenue generation, revenue generation.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of you guys are on the call are only going to get to appreciate them for this hour that you have them, but it's been a blast being able to get to meet Dan, Vic, and Holly, and the communication between them has been amazing too. And to that, I mean, I'd encourage you to come off of mute for a second, Vicka, because I think the interactions the three of you have had together as you try to create this and start to craft, let's say, a collaborative best thinking path forward have been really rich. And I was hoping that we could hopefully in this call share at least some of those lessons learned or the experience with the audience.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest lessons learned, and I think we learned it fairly quickly on last spring, is that where students learn really does matter. It matters to them and it matters to us. And so, we closed campus because we're trying to keep everyone safe, and congregate housing is, somebody said once to me like, oh, how's it going? I said, well, I work in congregate housing and there's a pandemic, so it's going not like that. But we're trying to keep everybody safe, but where students learn really matter. And I remember maybe 8 years ago or so, conversations around massive online courses, around MOOCs and what's going to happen with brick and mortar institutions. Is this the end of higher education? And I would say now there's a resounding no. Where students learn matter, whether that's in a residence hall or really close to campus. Brick and mortar schools, I think, are here to stay. That doesn't mean we shouldn't evolve and we shouldn't think about the fact that we need to adjust and reflect what is who is coming to campus. But this fear that we've outlived our usefulness, I think can be put to bed. I think that was a very valuable lesson, and not just for our students who might be coming from areas that maybe there's a rough home life, but you talk about Wi-Fi. You talk about being able to Dan was talking about student support services, having access to those student support services. So where students learn matter, it matters to them, it matters to us. We are better able to support students when they are near us. And again, the name of the game is persistence and retention. And so the better we can support students, the better access they have to our campus resources, the more likely they are to finish. And so for some students, online education is going to be just fine. But for the students that are drawn to our campuses, our presence matters, as does there. I think that's a valuable lesson out of the pandemic.
And Dan, I know that you had some I thought, some extremely insightful things to share with regards to student population. And I think what we might have known as non-traditional learners prior to COVID might have shifted a little bit. And I was wondering if you would share some of your thoughts on that.
I think one of the valuable lessons I think we learned from this past year is and we don't really, we might, in our work in housing, I think we've always tried to emphasize the importance of that community aspect, excuse me, of the collegiate experience, particularly for the first year students. But I think it became more evident this year because of the pandemic of the importance of the out of classroom experiences for everybody's learning. The ability to interact with members that become a part of the university community in spaces outside of the classroom are immeasurable now, as people are able to reflect on those who had that experience and now had it taken away this year. And for first year students that never had that opportunity, they're seeing what that value is, right? To have your own value systems challenged and pushed, to interact with other individuals, to begin to see things from a different perspective, or to be around people from different cultures and different backgrounds that you never had that opportunity through the first 18 years of your life, or in a non-traditional setting, someone who maybe had to focus on family first and now wants to go back and get that education is missing out on all those opportunities to have themselves challenged personally, alongside of the information or the knowledge they're receiving in the classroom. That experience was foreign to them this year. And so as we start thinking about what is fall 2021 going to look like on our college campuses, bringing people back in face-to-face gatherings where these experiences can happen and this learning outside of the classroom takes place on our campuses is going to be pivotal. And I was, in our conversations that we had in preparation for this, I was talking about the missed opportunities, in particular about the Black Lives Matter movement and all the conversations about the politicizing of the pandemic and leading up to our elections this past fall. Under normal circumstances, colleges would have just been exploding with conversations and dialogue and experiences for people to come together and experience these things in a different way, and to be challenged in terms of how they felt as an individual and what that meant to their contributions to their communities. We missed out on those opportunities for that stuff to happen in gatherings and in group settings. That's some of the most powerful things and experiences that I think people can have in their four-year undergraduate experience, is to be in that community when those things are happening and being able to interact in spaces with folks that then help shape who they are, what they believe in, and what they think is important. And then, I have always thought of, when you leave your college campus with your degree, you're taking that to pursue some kind of a vocation. But the other part is that you should be a better person, and you should be giving back to your community with your talents. So take care of yourself, take care of your family, take care of your community are the priorities I always talk about with my seniors. This is what you need to be thinking about as your exit strategy from campus when you walk across the stage, is these three things.
That's great, Vic. And I noticed, we had the prep calls, and I know that you've got some pretty good opinions also of the difference between in-person and digital experiences, especially when it comes to I think some of the self-selection that is enabled by an all digital environment. Would you like to share any ideas on that, especially with regards to student life?
Yeah, for sure. So particularly when you're looking at student life broadly, or and when you're looking at residence halls and living on campus specifically, there's not a lot of control that a student has over what messages they're receiving and who they're engaging with, and who happens to be in the bathroom the same time you're in the bathroom, or doing laundry the same time you're doing laundry. And that creates an opportunity for learning about difference. So we know that most of our students across the country, regardless of institutional type, are coming from neighborhoods and communities that reflect who they are. That is just how it is. It's how we are as a society. And we know that they are likely to return to a similar space. So really, college really offers an opportunity to experience different and new. And when you have a college population that is engaging in college virtually, the opportunity to interact with somebody that is different from you, that has a different experience than you, that has a different perspective than you, is lessened because they're not there. And so your social media is your social media, and there are analytics all at work to make you see the things that you are already interested in and not really to expose you to other things. And so it'll be interesting in the fall to see how things play out on college campuses when the diversity returns. After a year of being able to isolate and silo yourself and just listen to and just experience folks that you've already listened to, what does that look like when you come to college campus? But absolutely, I think there's a real danger, and we are living in such a politicized time, and there's a real danger, I think, to what does that look like when we actually are engaging with one another? Because even on campus right now, because we're not, we have masking and social distancing, and a lot of our programming opportunities are virtual. Even on campus right now, students aren't engaging in the way that they would normally engage. And so it'll be interesting to see what the fall looks like.
I think that's a great segue, and kind of open it up to any of the three of you to talk about what your plans and then actual actions and then new plans are meaning that what you'd expect to see when school opens in the fall. Do you have anything that you're particularly proud of, or things that you are particularly hopeful of as part of either trying to deal with physical space or trying to deal with a larger enrollment, or any things that you feel like are coming your way that you try to take steps to mitigate or address?
I think one thing that COVID has taught me, and maybe a little bit of all of us, is that we really, it's funny to think about the Future of Housing Task Force and how little we knew about the virus. I mean, we were making plans with the best of them, though. Like we were, but there was just so much we didn't know. And then schools can flip on a dime, right? So Miami was ready to open. We're not gonna de-densify. We're going to open on time. And then, I don't know, a week before my RAs came, it's like, no, we're going to delay opening for 2 weeks. We're going to put people in singles. And so that kind of experience, I think, makes you a bit skittish about what can you actually plan for. But I will say that I know that at my institution, there's lots of talk about a larger first-year class coming in, and what does that look like? We're not having any conversations about de-densifying, and so we could have more people than we've ever had before, but the pandemic has taught us, right, to be like, okay, let's see what happens May 1st for real. Let's see what happens. I'm really excited about the opportunity to think differently about second-year students, because they have historically not been a focus of the fall. Now we have second-year programs. There are lots of schools that do really great second-year initiatives, but those second-year programs are built on students that have been here for a year, and we have more students coming to our campuses in the fall that maybe haven't had any experience on our campus previously in their second year. So I think we have to be really focused on what are we doing for second-year students to help them get acclimated, to help them be familiar, to help them get build community in a way that they would have done in their first year without treating them like first-year students. Because in some ways they look a lot like first-year students, but in many ways they've completed, a year's worth of coursework. So they're not first-year students. And so how do we serve that population? I think that's a really exciting thing to think about, and I think it can leverage better support for second-year students for years to come.
Yeah, I mean, Vicka's pointing out something very important. We started conversations about this in January about thinking about the transition of second-year students that in some cases never even visited our campuses, right? So you remember when states went into shutdown mode literally a year ago this week or last week, a lot of these students hadn't made their final preparations for the next academic year. So I've got students who never even came to this campus yet. That don't even know where to find certain buildings, like where to go to financial aid or where to go to a bursar's office to make a payment. So there's a whole reorientation that's going to happen. And then there's been a significant participation drain in student organizations, clubs, and activities because we were vacant of students on our campuses. And they're going to be arriving in the fall along with a brand new freshman class that are looking for opportunities for engagement. And those opportunities could be kind of a bottleneck in certain situations because there's only X amount of campus jobs or X, a certain club or activity may not be able to absorb everybody that wants to participate now, or be in a leadership role because we've got twice as many people stepping on campus for the first time, even though the enrollment may be flat. It's different populations that are coming to campus for the first time. So it brings a different set of challenges that I'm excited about, but it's different, and it's going to require quite a bit of thinking and preparation if we want to be able to meet students where they are when they arrive in the fall.
Yeah, I would probably just echo what Vicka and Dan said from the standpoint of there's a lot of challenge, and there's been a lot of challenge, but there's also a lot of opportunity. And, you know, housing folks are a sturdy bunch. They're used to turning on a dime, sometimes 3 or 4 times. And, you know, Vicka's, you know, story about, you know, her plans, and then all of a sudden the plans changed. I mean, I lived through that with you, Vicka, to some extent, from hearing you talk about it. And that is exactly how it went down, you know. And I think something that is really exciting about, you know, looking to summer and fall is that I think that we're going to have professionals who probably should have always had a lot of confidence in what they brought to the table, but they're going to have even more confidence because they're the ones that made being on campus possible, to be honest with you, over this past year, you know. And so there's a lot of learning there. There's a lot of innovation that came into play. And so while I definitely agree, and we have our eye on the increased need for student services, because I think that's a real thing that we need to be thinking about and planning for, these folks are going to be able to do it because they have been doing it, and they have the skills to do it. So, you know, really demonstrating that essentialness in a different way is something that I think is a learning as well as something to look forward to.
I mean, just not to interrupt you, Nick, I suspect I'm about to interrupt you. But I think, yeah, I think in student life, we've had, I don't know if I want to call it a complex or a fear or a not enoughness, for lack of a different term. And when, I mean, when the pandemic hit, like, it became really clear the value add of not just residence life programs, but of the student life experience in a way that I think is going to help future conversations for years to come. No longer are we getting the question of like, well, why? Yeah, the out of classroom experience is as important as no, we have seen the lack of the out of classroom experience and the impact particularly on residential campuses. The lack of that has had a profound impact on the student experience, on their retention, on their persistence, on their expectations, ultimately, you know, on their giving. Like, all of these things have come into play. And so you talk about never wasting a crisis. I think housing and residence life and student life in general has been able to really leverage. And it's once we got over being freaked out, we were able to like lean into it and do some really good work. And I think it's all going to be better for our students. I mean, we are very ritual. We're very traditional. We're very like, this is how we do it. And we have opening and you get your key and we give you lots of way up in your face personal attention. And we couldn't do any of that. And so then how do we continue to serve students in a new way? So, and higher education can be hard to move. And we had to move. And so I'm excited. It'll be interesting to go back to like our regular jobs and if we'll feel like we have more time. Because we're doing all of this in our regular job. So I'm curious about that. We'll probably fill it in with something else, I'm sure.
And I don't know if this is an effect that's happening on your campus, Vicka, but my team, us forward-facing offices have been on campus all through the pandemic. So we've been present and had to serve students, even though we sent people home. There were still people that had housing and food insecurities. So we've been here all through this. One of the things that I'm watching happen is the aversion for other campus offices to begin thinking about returning from home and coming to campus to work. And what is that going to mean about the welcoming feel that students are going to receive from some of these other campus offices and part of the enterprise, because they have not been here physically on campus and interacting with the populations that have been on at least on our campus over the last 2 semesters. And so, you know, if they're resistant and fighting this and feeling that somehow that it's unsafe for them to work on campus, then it's going to really affect the way that students are going to feel welcome when they come back in the fall. So, you know, that's above my pay grade to work that out and try to get folks to kind of buy into this sense of, you know, it's time and it's safe for you to come back and let's start working back towards the new normal. But there's a lot of folks right now that are saying why. I'm just as effective pushing these things through from my couch and my dining room table as I was in that office back there. I don't understand why I have to be back there in the fall.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a conversation that many presidents and provosts are having to grapple with, particularly related to faculty who, for the most part, have not been teaching in person. I think certainly on my campus, I think on a lot of campuses, and I think that there's a line between being afraid, a very thin line between being afraid and being like readjusted to being more comfortable, right? And so, you know, I like to use my church experience as an example. We've been watching church online for about a year. In the last couple of weeks, we've gone back to in person. It is more challenging, right? Like I'm like, oh, now I got to get dressed and I got to make everybody on time. And I think people are afraid to come back to campus, but I also suspect that there's a lifestyle adjustment that they like better. And so when I don't have to travel in, you know, from wherever to teach, and I'm not there 3 days a week, and I don't have to, and so it's gonna be that above my pay grade as well. But those presidents and provosts are gonna have to figure it out, because it's not worth it to the perception is it's not worth it to students and their families to just do online education. That's not what they've selected. And there are enough schools that are going to go back to more normal, that, I mean, you won't have a base. You won't have folks that are coming to your institution. So presidents and provosts are going to have to figure it out. Otherwise, as Dan, I love how you use the word enterprise. As the enterprise is at risk if they can't get faculty and other folks who are really supposed to be on campus back on campus.
Well, I think one of the questions I've seen coming up even recently, and one of the things, thanks to Dan Aaron for sending me that message, is if you think about not wasting a good crisis, what are the things that you think are going to stick? What are the things that you've learned that are going to, let's increase the value proposition of your institutions? What are the things that kind of get you excited about trying to implement or try differently that you learn definitely has an impact, but you can kind of accentuate the negatives, I guess, or use the negatives to find the positives?
Here's a real small microcosm of this, right? I have some facility folks that have fought the notion of doing an express checkout like you would in a hotel from a housing room, because, you know, no, we need to be thorough. We need to stand there with the student, and we need to go through every corner and crevice of that room before we let them go. Well, the pandemic didn't allow us to do that. When we had to get people out of campus and need to get them out of here in 48 hours, it was grab your stuff, go, put your key in an envelope, leave the envelope on the reception desk at the residence hall, and go home and be safe. And we proved that we could do that. So now I've got these folks that were entrenched in the only way we could do that, it was one way. We've now shown that no, you can expedite things and you don't have to do it, you know, with this personal touch or anything, because that's not what students need or want. So there's a lot of things I think we've learned that we're going to have to take and model whether we like it or not, right? I was reading an article from Inside Higher Education a couple of days ago that surveyed student satisfaction with certain elements of what they've had to go through this past year. And as you would imagine, you know, the things that they miss the most are meeting with friends, in-person classes, participation in clubs and organizations. But the things that they valued were the efficiency and the ability to do some things remotely and online, like meet with an academic advisor. That's a chore for a student, right? I don't want to go meet with an academic advisor to get them to give me, you know, to check a bunch of boxes so I can register for classes. If I can do that virtually like this, I don't have to leave my room. I don't have to go here. I have to do that. So there are certain things that I think we've learned that we can continue to replicate that does not take away from the value of the things Vicka was talking about before, in having a traditional collegiate experience that we're going to have to model and do differently. It may mean that, you know, we have to stagger work hours then. So maybe somebody has to be available for students in a non-traditional setting from 4 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. every night to do certain things, but you don't have to do it in that office now. You can go home and do some of those 3 hours worth of work from your residence and do it virtually and still serve students better than we were doing in a traditional sense. Those are just a couple of minor examples. There's a lot of other things I think we've learned through this. Online training, for example, we were already moving in this direction. in terms of when I bring my student staff back and train them for the opening of the residence halls. And I've been very cognizant of the fact that every day that we take them away from their summer job is a day of lost income potential for that student. And so we've found ways to take almost 5 days of in-person training out of that process and make it online modules so students can do this on their own time at home in the summer and still get 5 days of summer income at their summer job and not come back here. And it sounds somewhat selfish. It's a budget savings for us too. We don't have to feed them. We don't have to clean behind them. So there's win-wins there from using some of the modality lessons that we had to put into place for the pandemic to manage things. But these are things that we're going to continue to do forever.
But honestly, that's absolutely perfect, because I think that I'd imagine until we do create the new normal, that we're going to have to kind of mitigate costs with whatever impact it does have on enrollment. So some of those efficiencies or things that we've learned are going to need to be part of the way going forward, especially if there's a student or a population that feels like they've received a higher level of service because you could do things in more comfort or digitally or allow access to other opportunities. It's really difficult to imagine a scenario where they're okay to give that up, to roll back to something, especially for the students that are like now freshmen or sophomores, that they never experienced before and doesn't necessarily even make sense.
Yeah. The telemed experience, I don't know how they're ever going to pivot out of that, in terms of the health profession world. And the telemed visit was the only way that they could meet with patients during the pandemic. And now that is going to be such a convenient way to manage minor health issues that industry is probably never going to go back to having everybody come into the office to be seen by a physician or physician's assistant.
Yeah, I just think that, to just expand a little bit on what Dan said, I think that the ability to use virtual everything, whether you're talking about Zoom or Teams or Google or whatever, just being able to do that, I think increases, it's certainly helpful on campus, things like academic advising appointments and tutoring and things like that for people that works for. But I think about even meetings. I think, we've and rightly so, we've focused a lot of this conversation on our student population, but for staff, staff and faculty, I would say more staff were just kind of overrun prior to the pandemic. And so things like, oh, can we work from home? Absolutely not. You can never work from home. Well, then we all worked from home for 3 months. And so clearly there can be some sort of, so I'm hoping that I have just enough power to leverage a day at home for my central team. My RDs live where they work, but if I can leverage a day as we return back to normal, we're on a rotation right now, but if I can leverage a day, I think that's just going to be such a game changer for attitude, for morale, for a whole host of things. And we know that people can be productive away from their offices. So I think that that's something good. I also talked about just the conversation around the role of student life and the role of our housing and residence life professionals. I think it's an elevated conversation. Now, my folks, so when your students leave and you're worried about housing or you're worried about their jobs, you really you got to figure out how to pivot. And so my message to my team when we closed, and for weeks on end, I said, I have 3 things that are guiding my decision making. The first is your health and safety. Nothing's more important than your health and safety. And so I'm trying to keep you healthy. I'm trying to keep you safe. That's what I'm trying to do. That's guiding my decision making. The second is our employment. Let's just call it what it is. We're revenue generating. We are rent based, and we are not collecting rent right now. And so we got to figure out how to keep everybody employed. And to that end, who is trying to make money right now? Well, our development office is trying to make money right now, and our admissions office is trying to make money right now. And so how can we be supportive? How can we use our generalist skills to be supportive to that? And then lastly, just thinking about the fact that we want to affirm the importance of our unit to the institution. Let's just call it what it, we don't want somebody to say, we went a really long time without RDs. We don't need them anymore. No, we want to affirm. So how are we constantly pivoting? How are we at every table we can be at? How are we being as helpful as possible so that we can live to fight another day? And that our presence, demonstrating our generalist nature, demonstrating how we can be helpful even when students aren't here, I think has been a tremendous blessing.
Yeah, to put a bow on what Vicka and Dan said, I think that everyone can agree that the pandemic was disruptive. That's just what it is. That's what it continues to be. It was also affirming, absolutely, in all the ways that Vicka talked about and all the ways that Dan talked about. It also, I think, made people think a little bit differently about crisis. And that's one thing that I would throw out here. In higher ed, we talk about crisis response, and we train people on crisis response, and we have to be expert crisis managers. And something that we're talking a lot about at ACUI with our members is being crisis resilient. Right? So being prepared for the next crisis, because the bottom line is that there's going to be a next pandemic and there's going to be a next campus emergency, or an emergency that's kind of more holistic in how it impacts our society, that also obviously impacts campus as a microcosm. And so, I think that is a really important takeaway for the field. And as Vicka said, I think the field is becoming more crisis resilient, and we probably need to unpack that a bit, right? And to make sense of that. And I suspect that will happen more after we kind of get through this. But that is a huge takeaway.
This is wonderful. And I think we're getting to the point where we always want to be very respectful of the initial idea, which is to make sure that we have professionals here that are able to support others who are either trying to service or respond to the COVID-19 crises. So we wanted to open this up to questions from the audience. You can ask a question by messaging me, and we'll take a look at some of those as they come through. But in the meantime, I had a couple of questions I wanted to ask based on some of the conversations we've been having. Vicka, I know that you have some very definitive opinions about the where we learn and its value to folks. I think when you consider some of the disruption, and then I'd say some of the other X factors where you had people who might have been trained to do one thing, but actually wound up doing another thing. What does the where look like for your institution come fall?
Yeah, I think, we've lost some things that were like just a normal part of it. So, we just shift dining. I think students learn in dining halls, and when you go to grab and go options, and I think that reduces community. And so I'm hopeful, I'm eager. I know some schools have actually already started reopening their dining facilities and returning to sort of more buffet options. That was something that went away pretty quickly. So I'd love to see those spaces be leveraged as community spaces, and maybe a way we were missing before. Our student centers have had similar things. I think as we look at lounges and study rooms and things like that, students learn in those spaces too. We've had to really restrict the use of those because of the pandemic, whether that's de-densifying who can be, how many people can be in a space, or closing them all together. So I think we know that students can learn in their rooms. I'm looking forward to the time period where students can learn all over campus again. Students learn, in quads, and they learn at lunch tables, and they learn after classes ended when they're transitioning. They learn all over campus. And again, where students learn matter, and the physical opportunity to be present on campus, I think, is tremendous.
I think that's great. And Lisa from Goody Clancy, I definitely do remember you. And Lisa has a question. She'd like to understand if there are any dining pivots. What is that experience going to be like? You mentioned it a little bit, Vicka, but as kids come back to campus, what do you guys have in plan, or what are you thinking about that might work?
It'll be, and I'm going to yield to Dan. I think he might have more direct experience with this area, but I'll say I would love to see us have more grab and go options. We increased where you could get grab and go because of the pandemic. Every place you can get grab and go right now. I think that works for students in a lot of ways. And so I'd love to see that be a continuation. I don't know that we're going to go back to things like you can serve yourself. I don't know that we're ever visiting that again, but that might produce more. If revenue is there and support is there, that might produce more opportunities for jobs, both for students and other professionals. So I think that there'll be some pivoting there. I'll yield to Dan.
Hey, you're making me depressed because I don't think I'll ever have a ginormous breakfast buffet in a hotel again ever. So So that's probably not a good thought to have, but
Your doctor didn't want that anyway, Dan.
well, you're probably right there too. I just added 5 years life expectancy on. I think Vicka's right. So one of the trends that was happening in dining recently has been to reduce carbon footprint. And so trying to do things that went away from having to have disposable containers, using water for trays that you could get out of the process by having people just have just their flatware in a traditional dining hall, were initiatives that were taking place, but the pandemic creating this more grab and go concept probably forced a lot of operations to do that. They may not would have been ready to pivot in that direction, and they probably won't go back. So from a sustainability standpoint, there's probably a lot of lessons learned that operators are going to continue to do going forward. We seem to have, because I'm a fossil and I've been doing this a long time, there's been a lot of cyclical things in campus dining that have happened over the years, from trying to create community in the dining space and have people get food and sit together and have more of a family style meal, to being more convenient and bringing in retail options so people can grab what they want and have more variety and take the food someplace else. So it'll be interesting to see where we are 2-3 years from now, because as Vicka said, grab and go is going to be popular. Because we've already made an investment in these containers and in the concepts and the platforms to provide that kind of a dining experience. And people have grown a little bit more accustomed to that. So it'll be interesting to see what we do in terms of space to still create a community experience over a meal. And how do we make that happen so that folks want the convenience of grabbing their food and taking it? Where are they going to take it? So a lot of us focus outdoor dining areas when the weather was reasonable, so that multiple people could have a place to have a meal together. But most of these were done in tents and in outdoor settings. And so will we continue to look at that and try to drive people into an outdoor setting to enjoy campus dining experiences wherever we provide those, and try to accentuate that during the months, or depending on where you are in the hemisphere, so that you can monopolize on that and keep campus community together a little bit more. So it'll be interesting concepts that I think we were forced to do that we might see that we continue to do going forward.
Thanks, that's great. I've got another great question from Debi McDonald at Jacobs. And this is for everyone, Holly, Dan, and Vicka. What would be your biggest successes in addressing the pandemic? And what are the things that you might want to do over for?
I'll go quick. So obviously for me, and I think probably for most of us on the call, being open, I mean, the fact that there are theoretically 4,700 students living in our residence halls at Miami right now is a huge success. They moved in September, they're still here, and we didn't have to shut down. That's a huge success. I would say the do-over. So we made this huge deal about not coming back to get your items last spring. Like once you were gone, you couldn't come back, and we didn't know about the virus, and oh my gosh. And I would just be like, come get your stuff. Like just come and get it. I don't care when you come and just come and get it, wear a mask, space yourselves out, come and get your stuff. We spent so much time trying to figure out how to get people back to their stuff. So I would want to do that again.
So the one lesson learned from us, I would say, is that we should have done a better job of bringing in health promotion professionals to help with the way that we branded, marketed, and educated students about our expectations for staying safe, from wearing masks, from distancing themselves. When we started to implement surveillance testing, all the consequences were punitive. And we didn't do a very good job of trying to come at this from a health education, social norming message with this population, because the last thing you want to do is they don't want you up in your face telling them what they should or shouldn't be doing. And so we had a real struggle with compliance and getting folks to do the things that we wanted to do to gain that, community safety aspect, keep positivity rates down. So we're going to, the virus is still going to be here in the fall. Nobody knows what the vaccination levels are going to be like in August. Everybody's optimistically planning that we'll be closer to herd immunity, but we're going to be dealing with this all the way through the holidays. And then when we get into colder weather, who knows what we're going to be dealing with. So we need to take the lessons learned and get them aligned properly by August.
This
Yeah.
is great conversation.
Oh, sorry about that, Nisha. The thing that I would point out is, I think something that was done well, and I would say that from a high level field perspective, in our work with them is, I think we've been very assertive about our expertise and about that we need to get into that game and say, this is what we're going to do. And this is the plan. And we're the experts to tell you how to do this. Right. And we're able to do that because of volunteer leaders and because of the expertise they bring, and I think part of that was creating space for those dialogues on a weekly basis for different subgroups and populations within the profession has been critical. So that's something that's been really good. And I would say the do-over or the do better would be to be even more assertive. I mean, to Vicka's earlier point, there is a predisposition maybe amongst people in housing and residence life not to necessarily believe in their expertise or that they should have that seat at the big table. And I think that they've demonstrated that should be happening. And so maybe we need to push that a little bit more, especially during times of crisis. And, I think a CUI is positioned as their professional home to help them do that. And I think that will be one area where I hope in the future, God forbid this happens again, that we keep pushing that.
Thank you all. That's been great. And being conscious of the time, Nusha, is there anything else we should say before we run out of time and have to disappear?
Thank you. This was great conversation. I let Debi, my co-chair and one of the initiators of this group, lead the conversation for closing.
Thank you. Just to close, on behalf of Donna Donaio, co-chair, and myself, and our newly joined co-chair, Niusha Arndt, I want to thank Niusha first for organizing this, Nick for moderating, Dan, Vicka, and Holly for your amazing insights. We all like to be smarter, and so learning from you is just phenomenal, and sort of lessons learned moving forward will make us all better practitioners and kind of learn from each other institutions to kind of not have to reinvent things. So that's fantastic. I want to also say upcoming, we're about halfway through our series in the spring. Niusha mentioned that we have a bunch of series. We try to just talk about all kinds of things so that we can all do our jobs better. Our next session on April 9th will be on lessons from corporate workplace and higher ed, learning, well, lots of different things. On the 21st of April, together with the BSA Committee on Resilient Environment, we will be doing a session on campus decarbonization master plans with Amherst, Colby, and Dartmouth. In this time of trying to find out when we don't have all that money from auxiliary services, trying to figure out how we're going to save money on campus. So that should be very interesting. Somebody had asked a question about outdoor environments. We also have a session coming up on outdoor learning environments. Something that may be a silver lining in this is we've always talked about learning outside, and Vicka has mentioned, yeah, kids can learn different places. So that should be very, very interesting. There's another session in May on future of learning, which is a kind of out of the box thinking with this disruption. Where are we going and what kinds of things can we do? And then finally in June, together with the EDI committee at the BSA, we're going to be talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion on campus. What we've learned in the pandemic, what we've learned with all the issues happening in this past year, and how we can move better forward as a community on campus and as individuals. So there's those. We had a great conference for North Atlantic SCUP last week, which was just lots of great sessions. And I want to let you all know that the SCUP conference in July is going to be July 11 to 13. It will be hybrid, so it will be in Philadelphia, and it will also be online. I just find the BSA and SCUP and ACUHO also just vast amount of information that we can all benefit, especially at this time when we don't have a lot of benchmarking for some of the issues that we're having to deal with. So we just have to think fast and bring all our best brains and thinking together. So thank you all. That's it for me, Niusha. So
thank you, Debi. Thank you all for joining us. Have a great day.